Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into the world of muscles. The things that let us move with such awesome precision and power.
Yeah.
We'll be zeroing in on skeletal muscles using this physiology handout from Dr. Rasha Eldeeb.
Great source.
It's pretty crazy how much is packed into these things.
Yeah, it really is. We often take for granted, just how seamlessly our bodies move, but there's this whole universe of complexity going on under the surface.
Right. Okay. So before we get all, microscopic and stuff, let's
Yeah.
just set the stage here. We know there are different types of muscle, right? Like skeletal, smooth, and cardiac.
Yeah.
And today we're all about those skeletal muscles, the ones we can actually, consciously control to move our bodies around.
Exactly.
These muscles are what's attached to our skeletons, and they enable everything from like a delicate finger tap on a keyboard to, a powerful leap across a stage.
It's true. It's pretty amazing.
And it's not even just about straight up movement, right? They're also what's holding us upright against gravity all day long.
That's right.
No wonder good posture is so important.
Absolutely. And here's a fun fact for you. That shivering you do when you're cold,
Oh, yeah.
that's actually your skeletal muscles working to generate heat. Evolution's pretty clever, huh?
So clever. All right, so how about we zoom in on the structure of these muscles? What's going on at that microscopic level?
Okay, so picture this. Skeletal muscles are like these bundles of long cylindrical fibers. Each one of those fibers is actually a single cell, although it's a bit unusual because it's got multiple nuclei.
Multiple nuclei. Why is that?
It's all about efficiency. Skeletal muscle cells can be pretty long, so having all those nuclei kind of distributed throughout the fiber helps with things like protein synthesis and just, overall cell function.
Ah, that makes sense. So what's inside one of these muscle fibers then?
Inside, you'll find what's called the sarcolemma, which is just a fancy name for the cell membrane, basically.
Ah.
And then there's the sarcoplasm, which is kind of like the cytoplasm of the cell. And then, of course, you got tons of mitochondria in there. Those are the energy powerhouses, right?
Tons of mitochondria. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme here.
You got it. Muscles are energy-hungry tissues. All that contracting and relaxing requires a constant supply of ATP, and that's produced by those mitochondria.
All right, let's keep going deeper. What else is crammed inside these fibers?
Now we get to the really cool stuff, myofibrils. These are long, kind of thread-like structures
Yeah.
that run lengthwise within the muscle fiber,
Uh-huh.
and they're what actually gives skeletal muscle its characteristic striated appearance.
Striated, so like stripes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
stripes. And those stripes, or bands, are formed by the arrangement of these two key proteins, actin and myosin.
Okay.
These are the superstars of muscle contraction.
All right, I'm ready to meet these superstars. Tell me more about actin and myosin.
Okay, so think of actin as the thin filaments. They're arranged in this double helix structure. It's kind of like a twisted ladder. Myosin, on the other hand, that forms the thick filaments. Each myosin filament is made up of hundreds of individual myosin molecules.
Hundreds. Wow, that's a lot of molecules in each one. Well,
Uh.
what do these myosin molecules look like?
Imagine like a tiny golf club, but with two heads. So each myosin molecule has a tail, a long arm, and then two heads. They're often called cross bridges, actually.
Okay.
And those heads have these flexible hinges, which are super important for how they function.
Okay, now this is where I need a little help visualizing this. Two heads and flexible hinges. What's so special about that structure?
It's all about how these heads interact with actin. One head binds to the actin, making that connection that's essential for the muscle to actually contract. The other head, though, that's like a real overachiever. It acts as an enzyme called ATPase, which breaks down ATP to provide the energy needed for both muscle contraction and relaxation.
Wait, so both contraction and de-relaxation? I thought ATP was just for the power stroke, for the contraction.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception, actually. Relaxing a muscle also requires energy, mainly to pump that calcium back into storage, but we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
It's important to remember that muscle function is kind of a dynamic process, and it needs energy for both the on and the off switch.
That's pretty fascinating. It really highlights just how much is happening at that molecular level, but we're not done yet, right? What about those striations, those bands that we were talking about earlier?
Right. Those bands are what form those repeating units called sarcomeres. Think of a sarcomere as the basic functional unit of muscle contraction.
Okay.
Within each sarcomere, you have all these distinct regions that are defined by how the actin and myosin filaments are arranged.
All right, walk me through these regions then. What's important to know?
Okay, so you have the Z lines, which are like the boundaries of each sarcomere.
Okay.
Then there's the A band, which represents the entire length of that myosin filament.
Mm-hmm.
And then within the A band, you have the H zone, which only contains myosin, and the M line, which is right smack in the middle of the sarcomere.
So the sarcomere is like this highly organized structure, almost like a little city, with specific zones for the actin and myosin. But how do those filaments actually interact to create movement?
Ah, well, that's where the sliding filament theory comes in. But I think we should save that fascinating story for the next part of our deep dive. It deserves its own spotlight, don't you think?
I agree. This is already a lot to absorb. We've journeyed all the way from like the macroscopic level of a muscle down to the intricate structure of sarcomeres.
I know, right?
And we even met the key players, actin and myosin, each with their unique roles in this grand performance of movement.
We have, and we've only just begun to uncover the marvels of how muscles actually function.
It's true.
In the next part, we'll delve into the super intricate dance of those filaments and explore how their interactions, fueled by ATP and orchestrated by calcium, give rise to that incredible range of movements we experience every single day.
I can't wait. But for now, let's just take a second to appreciate the incredible complexity and beauty of what we've discovered so far. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that this level of organization and activity is happening within every single muscle fiber, all the time.
It really is. And in the next part, we'll see how this microscopic world translates into the macroscopic world of, movement and strength and everything in between.
Awesome.
Welcome back to our exploration of skeletal muscles. Last time we delved into that microscopic world of muscle fibers, and we even met the power couple, actin and myosin.
It's amazing to think that all those tiny structures we talked about are working away inside us right now, enabling every move we make.
Exactly. And now we're ready to tackle the big question. How do those microscopic interactions actually translate into muscle contraction?
I am all ears. Bring on that sliding filament theory.
All right, let's break it down. The sliding filament theory, despite its fancy name, it's actually pretty elegant in its simplicity.
Yeah.
Muscle contraction. It happens when those thick and thin filaments we discussed, the myosin and actin, they slide past each other.
Oh, wait, so the filaments themselves don't actually shorten. That's kind of surprising.
You got it. The filaments stay the same length, but the sarcomere, remember that functional unit we talked about?
Yeah.
That's what shortens during contraction.
So it's like a telescopic mechanism where the individual parts slide into each other to create that overall movement.
That's a great analogy. And the key to this whole sliding action lies in those fascinating myosin heads, the ones with the two talents we discussed.
Oh, right. The binding talent and the ATP breaking talent.
Exactly. When a muscle receives the signal to contract, those myosin heads, they spring into action. They attach to specific binding sites on those actin filaments, forming what are called cross bridges.
So it's like they reach out and grab hold of the actin.
Precisely. And once those cross bridges are formed, the myosin heads do something remarkable. They swivel, pulling the actin filaments towards the center of the sarcomere. Imagine a team of microscopic rowers pulling their oars in perfect unison.
Wow. So it's like a coordinated microscopic tug of war with the myosin pulling the actin closer together. But what triggers this whole process, how does the signal to contract actually reach those myosin heads?
That's where our old friend calcium comes back into play. Remember those calcium ions stored away in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, just waiting for their cue?
Yes, like tiny athletes ready to jump into action.
Perfect analogy. When a nerve impulse arrives at the muscle fiber, it triggers the release of those calcium ions. They flood the sarcoplasm, surrounding the actin and myosin filaments.
And then what happens? Do the calcium ions directly interact with myosin?
Not quite. They interact with another key player we mentioned earlier, troponin, that regulatory protein attached to the actin filament.
Ah, the traffic cop of muscle contraction. So calcium is giving the signal for the traffic to start flowing.
Exactly. Calcium binds to troponin, and this binding causes a shift in the position of tropomyosin. Remember that other regulatory protein that was blocking the myosin binding sites on actin?
Yeah.
With tropomyosin out of the way, the myosin heads can now grab hold and start the rowing action.
So calcium is like the key that unlocks those binding sites, allowing the myosin heads to attach and pull on the actin filaments.
Precisely. It's this remarkable chain reaction with each step perfectly timed and coordinated to ensure smooth, efficient muscle contraction.
This is incredible. So we've got the myosin binding to the actin, pulling it closer, and the sarcomere is shortening. But this cycle can't just go on forever, right? How does a muscle relax after it contracts?
Excellent question. Relaxation is just as important as contraction. When that nerve impulse stops, The signal to release calcium ends too. And then, special pumps within the muscle fiber, they work tirelessly to pump those calcium ions back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum.
So it's like turning off a faucet and then using a pump to drain the water back into the tank.
Exactly. Without that constant influx of calcium, troponin, and tropomyosin, go back to their original positions, blocking those myosin binding sites on actin again. The myosin heads detach, the pulling stops, and the muscle relaxes.
It's amazing how this whole process can just switch on and off so precisely. But it makes me wonder, how does our body control the strength of a contraction? I mean, we don't use the same force for every movement, right?
You're absolutely right. The strength of a contraction, it depends on a couple of key factors: the number of muscle fibers recruited and the frequency of stimulation.
So if I need to lift something heavy, my nervous system recruits more muscle fibers to kind of share the load.
Exactly. Your brain is like a conductor, sending signals to activate more or fewer muscle fibers depending on the task at hand. More fibers firing means more force generated.
And what about the frequency of stimulation? What does that mean?
Well, imagine sending a single pulse of energy to a muscle fiber. That would cause a brief twitch. But if you send multiple pulses in quick succession, those twitches, they can add up, creating a stronger and more sustained contraction.
So it's like sending wave after wave of reinforcements to those muscle fibers, keeping them firing and generating more force.
Precisely. This process, it's called temporal summation, and it's another way our bodies fine-tune muscle contractions to meet the demands of different movements.
This is fascinating. It's like our bodies have this intricate control system, constantly adjusting the number of muscle fibers and the frequency of stimulation to achieve like the desired level of force for any given task.
And all of this is happening subconsciously without us even having to think about it. It's a testament to the incredible complexity and efficiency of our neuromuscular system.
Okay, we've got the sliding filament theory down, and we understand how the strength of a contraction is controlled, but I'm curious about something else. We don't always move in the same way, right? Sometimes we lift weights, sometimes we hold a plank, sometimes we stretch. Are there different types of muscle contractions?
That's a great observation. There are indeed different types of muscle contractions, each with its own unique characteristics and purpose.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered enough ground for one session.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Why don't we save that discussion for the next part of our deep dive? We'll explore the different types of muscle contractions, delve into the world of slow twitch versus fast twitch fibers, and even touch upon how our muscle fiber composition can influence our athletic abilities.
You're right, that is a lot to unpack, but it sounds incredibly interesting. For now, let's take a moment to appreciate how far we've come in our understanding of muscle function. From the intricate structure of sarcomeres to that elegant dance of actin and myosin, it's truly amazing how much is happening within each muscle fiber.
Absolutely. And in the next part, we'll see how all of this microscopic action translates into that incredible range of movements we experience every day, from the subtle to the powerful, from the graceful to the explosive.
I am ready to continue this journey, but for now, I'm going to enjoy a nice stretch and just marvel at the incredible complexity of these muscles we so often take for granted. Welcome back to our deep dive into skeletal muscles. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have.
Yeah.
From the microscopic structure of those muscle fibers to the fascinating dance of actin and myosin that powers every contraction.
Yeah, it's truly mind-boggling when you consider just how complex everything is that's happening within our muscles every second of every day.
It is.
And in our last segment, you mentioned different types of muscle contractions. I'm really curious to learn more about that.
Okay, sure. Let's start by unpacking the two main categories: isotonic and isometric contractions.
Okay, those names sound a little technical. What's the difference?
So isotonic contractions, those are the ones most people think of when they picture, muscle movement. In an isotonic contraction, the muscle actually changes length while it's generating force.
So like lifting a weight, your bicep muscle shortens as you curl the weight up and then lengthens as you lower it back down.
Exactly. And even within isotonic contractions, there are two subtypes: concentric and eccentric.
Okay, now you're really testing my vocabulary. What's the difference between those two?
All right, think of it this way. In a concentric contraction, the muscle shortens as it generates force, like the up phase of a bicep curl when you're actively lifting the weight against gravity.
So the muscle's doing the work, shortening and overcoming resistance. What about eccentric contractions then?
Eccentric contractions are kind of counterintuitive. In an eccentric contraction, the muscle actually lengthens, but it's still generating force. So it's like the downfalls of that bicep curl where you're slowly lowering the weight, controlling its descent.
So even though the muscle is lengthening, it's still working. That's pretty fascinating.
It is. In fact, eccentric contractions, they can be pretty demanding on the muscle fibers, and they're often associated with muscle soreness after a workout. Think about how your quads feel after hiking downhill. That's eccentric contractions at work.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about those isometric contractions you mentioned? Are those the no movement kind?
You got it. In an isometric contraction, the muscle generates force, but it doesn't change length. So imagine pushing against a wall or trying to lift an immovable object. Your muscles are working, but there's no visible movement.
So it's like a stalemate between your muscle and the immovable object.
Exactly. Isometric contractions, they're super crucial for maintaining posture and stability. Think about all the muscles working to keep you upright right now. They're constantly engaged in these isometric contractions just to counteract gravity.
That's incredible. We don't even realize how much our muscles are doing, even when we're seemingly still. So we've got isotonic and isometric, concentric and eccentric. Is there anything else we need to know about how muscles contract?
Well, there's one more fascinating aspect to think about. Different muscle fibers are actually better suited for different types of activity.
Oh, right. I've heard about those slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers, but I'm not really sure what those terms mean.
Yeah, so it all comes down to how quickly a muscle fiber can contract and how it gets its energy. Slow twitch fibers. They're also known as type I fibers, and they're like the endurance specialists. They contract slowly, but they are incredibly fatigue resistant.
So they're like the marathon runners of the muscle world.
Exactly. They're packed with mitochondria, and they rely on aerobic respiration, which means they use oxygen to produce energy super efficiently.
Okay, and what about fast twitch fibers then? Those sound more like the sprinters, right?
Right on track. Fast twitch fibers, or type 2 fibers, are the powerhouses. They contract quickly and generate a lot of force, but they get tired more quickly than those slow twitch fibers.
So they're great for like short bursts of intense activity, like sprinting or lifting heavy weights.
Precisely. They rely more on anaerobic metabolism, which means they don't need oxygen for those short bursts, but they can't keep going at that level for very long.
It's really fascinating how our bodies have evolved to have these different types of muscle fibers, each one specialized for different tasks.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting is that the distribution of those fiber types, it actually varies from person to person.
Really?
And even from muscle to muscle. Some people are just genetically predisposed to having more slow twitch fibers, while others have a higher proportion of fast twitch fibers.
So our muscle fiber composition can actually influence our athletic abilities and like our predispositions.
Absolutely. It's one of the things that can determine whether someone is naturally better suited for endurance activities, like long-distance running, or more power-based activities, like weightlifting.
Wow. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the incredible world of muscles. We've gone from the microscopic structure of sarcomeres to the different types of contractions, and we've even explored how our muscle fiber composition can actually influence our athletic potential.
It's been quite a journey, and it really is a testament to the incredible complexity and adaptability of the human body. Every movement we make, from the simplest gesture to the most demanding physical feat, it's all a result of this intricate interplay of cells, proteins, and energy.
I'm leaving this deep dive with a newfound appreciation for the power and the precision of our muscles. It's truly remarkable how much is happening underneath the surface, enabling us to move and interact with the world and even express ourselves.
It is. And as you go about your day, I encourage you to just take a moment to appreciate that incredible symphony of muscle activity that's constantly at play within you. It really is a marvel of nature, and it's what makes us uniquely human.
That's beautifully said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of muscles. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic, so stay tuned.